Let's continue. I want to begin by discussing something we actually discussed at Eric's house yesterday. It had to do with the structure of the book of Judges. You can see the A, B, C, D, E, D1, and C1, B1, A1. So we mentioned yesterday that that sometimes in the Torah, in the Bible, it's presented in a way that that it has a little poetry in it. And poetry sometimes, by the words themselves, they highlight a point or an idea. And when you get that highlighted, you don't think about it, you don't hear it frontally, you more feel it subconsciously. And that is something that is a stronger emotion. And when you have a stronger emotion, you really get to the picture of it. Sometimes entire books of the Bible have a certain structure. And the structure of the book of Shofting, according to Rabbi Yonatan Grossman, is as follows. In the beginning, everything seems like it's going well. After all, you have to remember that the previous book was a book of Joshua, which in fact was a very successful book, was a very successful period in Jewish history. It was a period of the generation that followed Moses' words, followed Joshua, conquered the land, settled the land, and we read of very, very, very few incidents where they sinned. And therefore, what we experience is that this is a very, very positive time, but we have to wonder if they were fortified enough, if they were strong enough to be able to continue the next generation. You know, the strength of an individual is not by seeing how good they are in their lifetime. That's certainly one high level. It's by seeing how their children are. And if you could see that their children and their grandchildren turn out to be as strong or even stronger than the predecessors, then you know that they've really succeeded, because they gave them the foundation of continuing even when the grandparents aren't around. So that is certainly something that we see in great people, and we see that in a great nation as well. So if Moses trains the generation, but then he leaves and he says to Joshua, take them over, and they succeed, so then that's a feather in the cap of Moses. That shows how Moses really was able to develop these people. However, Joshua raises a generation who succeeds. The question is, what happens to the generation afterwards? And the answer is that in the beginning they do okay. If we look, the introduction of the book of Shoftim, of the book of Judges, Israel asks God, who will lead the charge against the Canaanites, right? So they're following the ways. They're going to continue conquering the land, and everything seems to be in order, and they're all together. And then comes one of the judges, one of the great leaders, Othniel ben Kenaz, and it's mentioned previously that he had this great wife who was the daughter of Kalev, connected to, and he goes and he conquers the land, and we see that through a relationship between Othniel and his wife, and women play a very strong and important role in the book of Judges. And we're going to discuss that in this class as well. And then the third case is the story of Ehud, which we will discuss as well. And he has a great victory against Jordan. Now if there's a need for Ehud, a Jewish leader, then it means that there was a sin, that there was they fell a little bit. So that's not good. However, I think that's better. However, there was a success, and he defeated the enemy. The fourth section is Dvorah and Barak. There's a judge, and her name is Deborah, and there's a general, and his name is Barak. And in the end, they defeat their enemy. In fact, a woman does so in a very graphic way. So all of that seems to be going in the right direction. However, there are underlying problems, and the problems are that in order for there to be a judge, that means that the children of Israel had to have sinned, against God. And when the judge is not necessarily united with all the people, but he's doing with one tribe, then you have a sneaky suspicion that the people themselves are not in harmony. And that is what can break the nation. All right? So it's when you act against God, that's one thing. But when you start acting against each other and then you're isolating yourselves, that's another thing, and that's going to cause. And the turning point we see is in the section on Gideon, which we'll discuss next week. And then things start going downhill. And there's Avimelech, who corresponds to Devorah, because there's another story about a woman. And then there's Yiftach, who corresponds to Ehud, but it's in more of a negative way. And then there's Shimshon and all of his bad wives. And the conclusion of the book of Shoftim is that the children of Israel ask God for help. Who's going to help him fight? But it's against themselves. It's a civil war. It's against the tribe of Benjamin. So what started with the greatest promise, right? Israel's continuing with Joshua's mission, conquering the land, getting rid of the enemy, the non-Jewish enemy, ends up with getting rid of Jews themselves. And when Jews fight with each other, then it's the worst thing possible. Okay? In chapter 3, I want to show you an interesting you can see this, right? This new site. Hold on a second. A presentation, you see it? The cycle, okay. Yeah. So this is some guy named Danny Schwartz, and I found this, and I thought this to be a very interesting way to view the cycle of of Ehud ben Gera. Okay, this is our next story in the prophets. But remember last week I told you that there's a cycle, and the cycle happens with every single judge. And the cycle, it's going to tell us right now, the cycle of Ehud ben Gera. So if we look at it, it's 4 dots, and it starts, one second. It starts that the children of Israel are following in the ways of God, right? They're all going in the right direction. So that's good. Then the judge dies. And when the judge dies, there's a vacuum. And when there's a vacuum, the children of Israel start to intermarry and worship other gods. And when they worship other gods, then God gets angry. And when God gets angry, he sends a king, a messenger, a king of Moab, to make the lives miserable of Bnei Israel. And Eglon gathers the children of Ammon and Amalek, and they conquer the nation of Israel. Now, once that happens, then after serving Eglon for 18 years, Bnei Israel cry out to God for help. And then God hears them and sends a judge in the name of Ehud ben Gera, and he saves them, and then the land is quiet. That is what's called the cycle of the book of Shoftim, where you have a constant circle, and when there's a charismatic judge, then the people do well. And when he dies, then it all crumbles. Okay, I wanted to share that with you, and now we go back to reading the text itself. Obviously, it would be best if you read the text in Hebrew, but I provided for you in English, and we'll go over it together in English, which is why I didn't provide it in Polish. It would take too long. We'll just follow what I want to focus on, and it starts with verse 12. And the Israelites again did what was offensive to the Lord, and offensive in the word in Hebrew is ra, which means evil. And because they did that, then the king of Eglon, the king of Moab, took over for Israel and conquered them, like we've been discussing. And then it says in verse 15 that the Lord raised up a champion for them. Champion isn't the right word. The translation uses champion. In Hebrew, it's shofet. Shofet is a judge. In the Bible, a judge isn't simply someone who sits there and, it's Moshiach. A Moshiach is a savior, okay? So he uses the word champion, but here it's really a savior, someone who's going to save them from their mess. It's Ehud ben Gera, Ehud the son of Gera, who, by the way, was left-handed. Interesting that the Bible tells us that he was left-handed. Why do we care that he was left-handed? And obviously, that's going to be a vital piece of information for our story. Now, the Torah, the Bible goes out of its way and says that God raised him up. Right. So, who prepared Ehud? The answer is God. Later on in the Judges, it's not going to be God. It's going to be individuals, and you see how there's kind of a spiraling down away from this strong connection that they had with God. So the Israelites had to send tax to the king of Moab. So Ehud goes and brings the tax, but what he does is he makes a sword that actually has both sides of it are thin-edged, are very, very have a very sharp edge. Okay, and he hides it under his cloak. So you'll ask, but why didn't they? When you go to see the king, they're supposed to search people. The answer is they search everyone's left side, but they never search anyone's right side because nobody in ancient times were lefties. Everyone was a righty. That was just the way you did. You trained yourself to make sure that you used your right hand because that's how everyone was. Well, Ehud, for whatever reason, was left-handed. Therefore, he hid his sword in his right side of the cloak, and no one ever checked that. And then he said to the king, I have something secret to tell you. And the king was a very fat man. The prophet goes out of its way to tell us this. And he says, I have a big secret to tell you. And there's a lot of commentaries as to how exactly he got to him alone and privately. And when he told him, I have a secret from God, in verse 21, he reached with his left hand and drew the dagger on his right side and drove it into the belly of Eglon. Now the fat of Eglon closed over the blade, and therefore you couldn't get it out, and all of his guts came out. It's really the Bible is very graphic about this. And what happened was, because he stuck it in and he lodged it in, it was not visible. But the king was he died, and the people, the guards, didn't know, and that was enough time for Ehud to escape and to go tell the Israelites that their king is dead, so we can go and attack them. And that's exactly what happened. They went and attacked them, and they defeated them. And in verse 30, on 29, on that occasion, they killed 10,000 Moabites, and no one escaped. And on that day, Moab submitted themselves to Israel, and the land was quiet for 80 years. That's the story. Okay. Now, in this story, what we see is that it's hard to for the next 7 stories. It says the land was either quiet for 40 years or 80 years. Sometimes the Torah uses round numbers in order to just give a point. 40 represents a solid period of time. A complete period of time. How do we know that? In the Bible, where does the word 40 come up?
40 days.
40 days per month.
40 days on the mountain. That represents a long time, correct? Where else?
40 years on the Negev, on the...
Excellent. 40 years in the desert, right? Wandering 40 years. Okay. It also rained for 40 days straight during Noah. In other words, 40 represents this complete period, and 80 means that even the next period. Okay. So if the first story that there was 80 years, it means that Ehud was so successful, and they still remembered what it was like with Joshua, that there was a good period of calm, and before the next disaster took place. If we count up the years, we get into a little bit of trouble, because it'll say 80 years and it'll say 40 years and 40 years and 80 years and 40 years. That sounds like 300 to 400 years, which is a lot. But it's possible to say, and this, I tried to get a picture of this. Well, it's a map of Israel. And what I wanted to show you was that in the book of Judges, there are judges, and each judge is from a different place. Each judge is from a different place, which means that it's possible, and we'd have to analyze this and check this out, that all of this was happening at the same time. If you were down south, so then maybe the tribe got in trouble with the Moabites, and if you were up north, maybe the tribe got in trouble with the Kushan Rishatayim, or maybe you got in trouble with the Amalekites. So it's possible that all of this was happening so they were overlapping, and therefore one was happening 80 years, and the different tribe was going through a different trial, and they had a different judge. So, and that's what it says kind of at the end. It says, like as an afterthought, after him came another a man named Shamgar, the son of Anat, who slew 600 Philistines. So he was in the Philistines, which was by the coast. That's where the Philistines were. So Ehud was really on the eastern side of Israel, and Shamgar at the same time was on the western side. We also see that Ehud was a stand-up character. He was chosen by God. He used his powers, appropriately. There was no extra drama in his story. It's a pretty straightforward story of a judge or a Moshiach, a savior, doing what is supposed to be done, and therefore we consider this to be a very positive story of the book of Judges. The next story takes place in the north. Now, if we look at the north, we're looking at Mount Tabor, okay, and we're looking at it's near the Kinneret, near the Sea of Galilee. So all the way up north is another area, and the Navi says, "Vayosifu b'nei Yisrael lasot hara b'nei Hashem." The Ehud met. The Israelites again did what was offensive to God, and now Ehud was dead. Why does the Navi go around and tell us that Ehud was dead? Once again, I think the message is, if your success is based on a personality, and the personality disappears, then your success in following God's ways will disappear as well. And that's why the period of the Judges is a very delicate or shavir, fragile. It's a fragile period. It's not a healthy nation that can handle on their own. They need saviors. They need people. And when the people leave, then they end up being seduced by the people that are around them, which we mentioned in previous classes. Where is he sitting? He's sitting in a place called Charoshet Goyim. So they decide that Charoshet Goyim is really, you know what, I would say it is, this is Haifa. It's probably near Caesarea, if you ask me. Okay, so it's very close. Caesarea to Mount Tabor is within a day you can get there in ancient times. So that is, that's where he is. But God got angry, and he sends them to become slaves to the king of Canaan, who is the king in Chatzor. If I had more time and we can have a long discussion, I would show you that Chatzor is in the north, and it is one of the strongest or the most developed archaeological tells in Israel. Okay, there's so much there and so much to see and understand. And here is a reference straight to this story in the Judges. So they're serving the king of Canaan. And what happens? You know the cycle, right? They become slaves and they call out to God. Verse 3. Obviously, the cycle breaks if they don't get to this point of calling out to God. And that's a frightening and somewhat comforting to the story of the Judges. In other words, in the story of the Judges, wherever they were, in whatever circumstance, they're always still calling out to God. Imagine what would happen if that they're so far gone, they're so far intermarried, that they don't even call out to God. That's a danger of extinction of the Jewish people. Okay? So in verse 3, they call out to God. They have to say, please save us, because the Canaanites had 900 iron chariots. And he oppressed the Jews for 20 years. Now, we mentioned already that the iron chariots, we mentioned it in the end of the book of Joshua and the beginning of the book of Shofting, that the reason that the children of Israel did not conquer all of the land is because some of them had iron chariots, and there was too much work for them to go through to defeat them. In ancient times, iron chariots are very like tanks, basically. And then comes our heroine. Our heroine is Deborah. She's the wife of Lapidot, and she is a prophetess, and she judged Israel at the time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah, a tomer tree, and people would come to her for judgment. And therefore, what is the role of Deborah? She's not simply she's not a general. She's not a warrior. She's a spiritual person. She's a judge. She is she's a leader of the people, and she judges them according to the Jewish laws. Now, she decides to summon the general Barak, the son of Abinoam, who was in a place called Kedesh in Naphtali. And she said to him, God has commanded you to go and march up to the Tabor, that mountain that we talked about, and take 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zvulun. And I will draw Sisera, Yavin's commanders. The commander of the army was called Sisera, that was his name, with his chariots, and they will come towards you to the Vadi, to the Vadi Kishon, which is a Nachal. In between two mountains is always a Vadi, okay? And I will deliver him into your hands. So apparently, Devorah had a prophecy that God told her. Once again, very, very strong. God delivers a message to the prophet, and the prophet hired or appoints a great leader, a general by the name of Barak, and they go and he says, "I will deliver him into your hands." So then Deborah says to Barak, "You should know one thing, Barak." He said, "I'll go with you." Barak in verse 8 says, "If you will go with me, I will go. If not, I will not go." In other words, I want God's representative with me in this battle. So Devorah says, "I will go with you. However, there'll be no glory for you in this course you are taking. For the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Now we have to think about this. To think about it in ancient times. To think about the fact that it was a patriarchal society. Women were not fighters. Women were not speakers. Women were barely judges. Women were not, speaking to people and controlling. And yet the Navi here says in a very positive way, in a very empowering way, that this is Devorah. Not only is Devorah in charge of the whole situation, and she kind of appoints Barak to go and do the fighting, but she also says to Barak, you should know that the end story is going to be by a woman as well. We might want to ask ourselves, what is the overarching message that that God is choosing here? What is he trying to teach them? Is he teaching them equality? Is he teaching them that things are the opposite of what normally happens? Is he trying to enhance the relationship between men and women who are Israelites and recognize that there's those roles on both sides? This is a very, very, very powerful statement, that it's not like, there's Moses and then there are all these women that happen to be around who helped him out. This Dvorah is Moses. Dvorah in that time is Moses and Joshua. Right? This is the leader of the land. She's a prophet and a leader and a judge. So what happens then is Barak then goes to Naphtali. By the way, those are tribes, right? He gets 10,000 and marches up after him. And Deborah also went with him like she promised. And in verse 11, the Navi tells us, by the way, who lived around there at the time? A group called the Canaanites. You know who the Canaanites were? They descended none other than Yitro. And he had a tent in this area near Kedesh. So Sisera, now the battle takes place. It's less interesting for me. Then Deborah said to Barak, oh, today is the day God said God will deliver Sisera to you. And Barak charged down the Mount Tabor, and the Lord threw Sisera and all his chariots into a panic. Be aware that there's biblical scholars that go into exactly how this panic, what was the panic, what took place. If you go to the Mount Tabor at a certain time of day, there is a mist that basically you can't see, and through some understanding strategy and understanding the weather and the geography, Barak made a great victory. Okay, and as a result, we ran them all the way to Chereshet Goyim, and all of Sisera's soldiers were killed. Not one man was left, except, of course, for Sisera, who fled on foot to the tent of Yael, wife of Hever, the Canaanite. For there was friendship between the king of Chatzor and the family of Hever, the Canaanite. Think about this. Yael is not Jewish, living in the land of Canaan while the Israelites are there. She's friendly with the king of Chatzor, or there's a relationship there. And it's unclear where her allegiance lies. We don't know. This is the first time we know. All we have is one piece of information about her. Her great Zayda was none other than Yitro. That's interesting. Yitro, we're reminded. We don't remember because the Torah doesn't exactly tell us whether Yitro joined the Jewish people or he kept apart from the Jewish people. This seems to be a proof that it's somewhere in the middle. Yitro didn't convert to Judaism, but didn't leave the Jewish people entirely. Apparently, he or his descendants moved to the land of Canaan to be close to the Jewish people. That's a beautiful thought from the past that applies to the present, right? There are those people who don't need to be Jewish, but they need to be close to the Jewish people because they recognize that the Jewish people are blessed. And if they have the opportunity to help out, then they will take that opportunity and they will become blessed even more. So Yael goes out of her tent, which is unusual, and she invites Sisera the general into her tent, and she covers him with a blanket, which is a strange piece of information. Think about that for a second. She covered him with a blanket. Was he cold? Wet? He says to her, I'm thirsty, can I have some water? She gave him some milk. And she covered him again. You have to wonder at the terminology is being used. Okay? He said to her, stand at the entrance and make sure no one comes. And then verse 21, Yael, wife of Hever, took a tent pin. A tent pin is a stake. What's a stake in Polish? It's to make, to push into the earth so that your tent stays strong. It's called a stake. And when he was fast asleep from exhaustion, she approached him quietly and she drove the stake through his temple until it went down to the ground. Basically, she slammed the stake through his head into the ground and he died. And just at that time, Barak, who was running after Sisera, came and said, where is he? And she said, I'll show you where the man you're looking for is. He went inside and saw Sisera lying stake in his temple. On that day, God defeated Yavin for the Israelites. And the hand of the Israelites was stronger against the Canaanites until they destroyed the king Yavin of Canaan. Wow, what a powerful story on many levels, right? We have Devorah as the leader who orchestrates the whole thing, and we have Yael who does the final killing. Okay, so you have here you have these women who are in control of the physical destroying of the enemies, and you have Barak, who's he takes care of the army. Now, why is this significant? It's significant because it's breaking down some of the stereotypes that maybe they would be in ancient biblical time until modern time, that the woman is only capable of being in the house. The woman is only capable of bearing the children and doesn't have a role in the public sphere. Comes along this story and it destroys it. And it says, not only do they have a role, but they have a very, very clear mission, which is on a public scale, to be a judge, to be a leader, to be a prophet. And not only that, but the question that you might want to ask is how Yael overcame Sisera. How did she do it? What did she do to just overcome Sisera? We get a sense of what happened here in the next chapter, which is very unusual. The next chapter, chapter 5, is not a story. It is a song sung by Devorah, recognizing the greatness of that day. Now, what does this remind us of?
Song of Moshe.
Of course, it reminds us of the Song of Moshe. There are only 3 songs in the history of the Bible. There's the Song of Moshe, there's the Song of Israel later on in the 2nd generation, and then there's the Song of Devorah. This Song of Devorah is meant to very, very clearly remind that she was the Moshe of the time. And she will say, I will sing a song. If you can read Hebrew, in bold are the words Ashira, which is the name of my daughter. So that's where it comes from. Right here, Moshe said the same thing, but also from Devorah. Devorah says, I will sing a song to tell what happened in this story. So this whole chapter is devoted to her singing this song. And she says the following: the days of Shamgar, verse 6, people are going around, deliverance ceased. In other words, there was no salvation until I arose. O Deborah arose, mother in Israel. So fascinating. How does she define herself? She's a mother, but she's also one who rose up because no one else did. And then what does she do? They chose new gods. Was there a fighter then in the gates? No shield or spear was among the 40,000 in Israel. My heart is with Israel's leaders, with the dedicated the people, bless the Lord. So she was looking for people. So in verse 12, it says, awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake. Arise, O Barak, take your captives. And then something weird happens. That only we learn this in this song, where they get their army from. We said from the tribes of Naphtali and the tribes of Zebulun. What happened to the tribe of Yisachar? So in verse 15, in 16, she says to them, why then did you stay among the sheepfolds and listen to the flocks? Which means she's yelling at the people of Yisachar that they didn't come up right away. So she, like Moses, yells at people who need to be yelled at, and she told the people and praised the people who needed to be praised. Okay, that's interesting. Then she gets to verse 24. Most blessed of women should be Yael. She's the wife of Heber the Canaanite. Most blessed of the woman in the tents. He asked for water, she offered milk. In a princely bowl, she brought him curds. Once again, parallel, okay? Her left hand reached for the tent pin, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, crushed his head, smashed and pierced his temple. But then it says in verse 27, between her legs he sank. Where he sank, there he lay destroyed. And the commentaries wonder what it means between her legs. One approach, which would explain the simple understanding of how exactly she was able to overcome him. She was a woman and she seduced him. This is not something that's unheard of in ancient times. Until modern times, a woman has certain powers, and this is one of those powers. But what the story here is telling us is that it's not enough that she seduced him and then waited for Barak to come and finish him off. Rather, she who uses her feminine side to seduce him is also she who uses a very powerful side of taking the stake and ending him and killing him. So we end up with a fascinating personality in Yael. In fact, one of my students who converted to Judaism took the name Yael because she liked the biblical power of this individual, and the story continues to be positive. Yes, it started off negatively, but the people did the right thing. They called out to God. Devorah heard. She started an army. She went to get the tribes. Some of the tribes listened. Others may have not. And we see a little break in the unity. But then all good from there. Sisera was defeated and destroyed. The army was destroyed. And Yael becomes really the victor. Like she becomes the hero of the story, and meant to remind us that we should never underestimate, from the Bible's perspective, men have power and women have power. Men have influence, as do women, and that's a message that we see from this story in Shoftim, the Judges, chapter 4 and 5. And then the Navi ends by saying, the land was quiet for 40 years. Okay, this is the lecture today. I appreciate all of you for joining, and I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you.